Welcome to the Beyond Atheism podcast, with me, Nathan Alexander, and my co-host, Todd Tavares. This podcast moves beyond questions of God's existence to ask, what's next in a godless world? Beyond Atheism is produced and distributed by Atheists United Studios.
Alastair Lichten is a humanist community builder with Humanist UK and the author of the blog Humanist Dad. He joins us today to talk about parenting and humanism. Alastair, welcome to Beyond Atheism.
Oh, thanks for having me. Long-time listener, first-time caller.
Yeah, it's great to have you on, Alastair. Just to get started, could you tell us a little bit about your own religious background? Were you raised religious or were you always a humanist?
I don't think I've ever actually been what you would call religious. Our family certainly didn't have any clearly religious practices, beliefs, or identity growing up. We almost never went to church or synagogue. But at the same time, humanism was not really an option I was aware of. And I think the best example of that is my completely, I would say, normal, typical, secularish experience of religious education at school didn't really have the concepts of non-religious, let alone of humanists. And and if you go through this sort of system, it's getting better nowadays. The impression I think you get is that everyone is sort of religious by default, but there are some people who aren't really that religious and some people who are super religious. So I kind of thought I was in the not really that religious category. And my experience has also always been that humanism is a label that people come to realize applies to them, sometimes long after it being something that actually would apply to them. Although I would say I became an atheist, I think, pretty much as soon as I gave the question any real consideration, and I'd been interested in the politics of religion, atheism and secularism right through that whole new atheist period into the modern atheist movement. But it was becoming a father that I think led me to centering humanism within my rather nebulous non-religious identity. And as for my parents, although they were not religious, I have been able to go back and reflect on how their religious backgrounds, Jewish and Irish Catholic, impacted on who they were, how they raised me, and how my humanism has been shaped.
Well, maybe we can talk a little bit about that, because it's one of the things that comes up a lot for us is sort of deconversion stories, but you don't seem to have one. I mean, this atheism, right at the word go, that seems like a pretty simple story. How does the humanism develop? Where did you find that you were a humanist, or did you become a humanist? How did that conversion happen?
The realizing I was an atheist, I think that was just, oh, that's an option. I'd never really thought of it. Oh, yes, I guess that's probably right. And I think that was at the time when kind of the God delusion was being talked about and shared around a lot. And so that was very, very quick. Humanism, I had been focused on kind of my interest had been in kind of anti-theism, anti-religious. My professional interest had been on secularism. The reason humanism, and again, what happened is, if you give me a list of words, said tick all these words that apply to you, pretty much as soon as I knew the definition of humanism, I would have ticked that word applied to me. But coming to it to be more of a kind of a central part of my non-religious identity is more of a gradual process. I think I'd always been very interested in social justice, and realizing that within the kind of multitude, the wider non-religious movement, the humanist strand is the strand of that movement which is most focused, I think, on humans and social justice and building a good life and a good society. And that process happened alongside the process of beginning to think about being a parent and starting a family, and what would be kind of my approach. Because I mean, atheism is not really an approach to life. Secularism is political approach, though not really a wide, like not really a comprehensive worldview in that sense. So I just think it just kind of, in terms of the words that described me, just over time, just kind of went up and up and up the list to where it is today.
Well, that's convenient.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't have any kids myself, but I mean, I feel like religion or like Christianity or whatever, like one thing that can provide is kind of like the institutional supports, I suppose, like for families. Like there's sort of rituals that are set for baptisms and so on. Can you talk about how you try and like use humanism or draw from like humanist rituals in your own parenting?
If you are raising your child within a religious community, religious communities are just more established. They are better funded, larger, more complex. They have more complicated support structures, from church baby group right the way through to church teen club. And we don't have that in knowledge. When you being non-religious is often, and being a humanist is often about piecing together knitting together a support structure yourself rather than coming for you. And as a humanist, we access support structures, because if you want to take your kid to a baby group, at some point you're probably going to have to go to a church baby group because they're going to be, because they've got most of the buildings that are suitable for that sort of thing. You humanists, we have this, I think, superpower to knit together, because we are used to not having kind of a structure in that sense, in that sense of our own. We have to piece together communities, access different services to make that holistic whole.
So is part of it then building that network? I've noticed, like, even your speech here is definitely pointed towards something that's very intentional and thought out, very proactive. Your writing expresses this very clearly as well. Have you, as a humanist now, is that a network that you've been working to build? Has it been there? Are you expanding it? What's its current status?
I think intentionality is a really key point there. That would be, if I was to kind of make kind of a word cloud of the things that I think makes my parenting humanistic, intentionality is a big part of it. And for many people, humanism is itself, why I think it's tied to intentionality in that sense, is you can just be not religious, or you kind of have that sense that, most people are religious, I'm not very religious. And that is, and there's nothing intrinsically wrong with that approach to life, but that is not really a very intentional thing approach to the topic. Humanists are very often people who are non-religious, and actually think a lot about that, and think, how does that impact and affect me and my view of the world? So I had been really interested in humanist parenting for a long time before becoming a parent, and there's a lot of intentionality in my approach. And part of that is just always worried about, am I doing the wrong thing as well? So trying to be, is this the right approach? And trying to use my humanist values of reason, evidence, and empathy to approach topics like, what's the best approach to weaning? And actually, it's not like there's a humanist approach to weaning, but we chose an approach called baby-led weaning, and part of that was that kind of fit with our values. It felt like it was an evidence-based approach. It felt like it was reasonable. It felt like it was having empathy for and putting ourselves in the position of our child. So there's no kind of direct line by, oh yeah, God doesn't exist, plus this minus that times this equals baby-led weaning is the right approach. It's just the values, things that inform how we approach kind of any parenting conversation, and it's something that my wife and I are very interested in having those conversations. How we've talked about, how are we going to approach them dealing with this issue, which will probably come up when they're teenagers. And well, actually, right now, what we need to do is get them to get to bed on time. That's the on the hierarchy
Yeah.
and the hierarchy of needs at the moment. A lot of their needs are kind of much nearer to the base of that hierarchy.
Right. So one of the things this sort of points to a distinction between maybe at least the stereotypes of religious rearing, which would be that like it's very prescriptive, right? And we see this a lot now. Boys are this way, girls are that way. At this age, a child needs to do this. You shouldn't do this. You should do that. But it sounds like you're almost starting from scratch, just going, like you said, like the hierarchy of needs. What do we need now? What can we plan for tomorrow? Is it always that kind of game where you're just trying to stay one step ahead or figure out how you want to deal with something?
Sometimes, and you talk about kind of inventing from scratch. It reminds me of the joke in The Simpsons when, I don't know if maybe this reference is decades out of date and it won't work, but when Homer raises a toast and he says, to alcohol or to beer, the cause of and solution to all of life's problems. And I kind of think there's something similar, and it's like, to reinventing the wheel, the cause of and solution to all of humanism's problems. And
yes,
they have this humanists kind of are so often reinventing the wheel. That's actually the kind of the really exciting part of it. It's there's no God. This is the one life we have. What do? We don't need to be bound by tradition. So blank page. Let's start with just reason and empathy and looking around the natural world and build a whole life. And that's kind of really exciting. But actually reinventing the wheel, one reason we don't do it is because the wheel is invented. And sometimes we need to balance that against seeing that there is actually there's a long tradition that humanists can draw on. We don't need to reinvent the wheel from scratch using just the awesome power of our wonderful, amazing intellects all the time. If we try to do that, we are there's a hubris that there is a long tradition of humanist thought about parenting. There is a long tradition of humanist thought about values formation and education. And though we don't want to rely on a sort of dogmatic approach and say, well, we find the label humanist and then we say, okay, what does we find that label? Then what does that label say about X? That's the wrong approach. But also realizing, well, if I found this label because I find what it says about X to be good, what does it say about Y? And can I then apply my thoughts and apply that reason and empathy to that and see, is it also got the approach to this issue correct? Or does it need to be improved?
So it sounds like it's both. It's a lot of like, it's sort of an ethos. It's an ethical approach, right? Trying to find that middle path between the vices, but also building on something that's been established. If you can let us give us a peek behind the curtain, what are some of these humanist practices that you're able to draw from that have been either like historically tested or just part of the humanist canon that's being passed down?
Humanism is a progressive worldview that values reason, evidence, and empathy. So actually, it gels really well with a lot of modern best practice on child development education without it necessarily needing to be from a humanist perspective. If you were to pick up a modern childhood education book that has been written by someone with actual expertise in their topic, that's at least going to be probably a secular approach to almost any issue. I mean, you can find books about Christian approaches to potty training, I'm sure, but generally speaking, what we consider best practice within any kind of field of study is probably it's a genuine field of study and has a genuine modern evidence-based approach. I think it's going to be pretty consistent with humanism. Though, if we look back, we can see that people have been thinking about how do we develop an actual evidence-based approach to childhood development education for a long time. I would say a great example of that is Montessori. Now, we can look back at Montessori education from the 21st century and say, actually, a lot of those ideas have not stood the test, have not stood up to the rigor of long testing and comparison, etc. But a lot of those have just entered kind of our mainstream view of education. We don't, generally speaking, view children as inherently evil or sinful as a starting point for childhood education, generally speaking, anymore. And that's kind of just become so universal. That's the kind of wrong approach. We don't really think of that as a humanist approach to not think in that way.
Man, I hadn't even considered that. I hadn't thought about children as little sinners and needing to be cleansed and purged. Like if we're evaluating, okay, so you've got something like Montessori where it still has to be sort of like means tested. Does it actually do what it claims to do? What do you look for when you say something is humanist? I've picked up on the reasonable and evidence-based. Are there other concepts that it has to be sort of imbued with? Is there a worldview that you're trying to impart?
That it's difficult because there is a question. Humanism, I think, is a descriptive worldview. When we're talking about humanist, we're describing it being focused on human needs, focused on an understanding that humans are mortal parts of the natural environment who can solve problems through reason, empathy, etc. It's not a prescriptive thing. So I would say there's a lot of things around a lot of progressive parenting resources that I say is very consistent with my humanism. And sometimes you kind of actually sometimes it's not in any way explicit, and the person may be coming from also a liberal religious position as well that has led to something that actually gels quite well with my humanist approach. You also get kind of these like aha humanism moments, I call them, that there's something you're doing, some approach you're taking, and it doesn't have to be about parenting, anything in your life, that it's just felt kind of seemed reasonable to you. And then you find out that is actually more common among humanists, or you speak to other humanists and if they find out, oh, actually you've kind of come to the same conclusion as me. We don't have, in the same way that we don't have a defined holy book, the canon of what is kind of what books humanists have on their bookshelves, what TV shows humanists have in their watch list, what podcasts they listen to, etc. Sometimes that is because they are explicitly about addressing humanism, and sometimes actually we realize that there is a humanist culture that we're not really necessarily aware of as being humanist until we realize that kind of how it's not intrinsic, it's not absolutely delineated in that way, but we realize that people who have a more humanist approach are going to navigate towards other things, whether that's political views, scientific views, value views, pop cultural views as well.
One thing I wanted to ask you, again, like the kind of challenge of being a humanist parent is, what do you teach your kids about religion? Like, if anything, like obviously, to kind of grow up in the world, it's important to understand religion, but it's probably a challenge to kind of, give that information. So how do you approach that question?
Religion is a big word. So religion ranges from kind of like the truly horrifying and destructive to the benign, even positive, even lovely, and nice and warm and fluffy. So I don't want to shield my kids away from religion. A lot of my thinking about religion and kids is probably around kind of more older kids, because going back a bit, for over 8 years, I was a professional secular education activist, and I dealt with hundreds of pieces of casework of inappropriate religious influence in schools. And often I'd be dealing with a piece of casework which would come in by email, phone, etc. And I'd often be dealing with issues of whether it's bias, religious education, or school-imposed worship, or evangelical visits. And a typical interaction would go something like the person saying, I'm an atheist, but I want my children to make up their own mind, So I've never told them anything about religion. But something's happened. They've come back from school saying they're a Christian or with all these religious ideas. And although trying to help them with their issue, I think kind of an issue in there of I want them to look at their own mind, so I've never told them anything about this. Is it?
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a little bit of a flaw in that kind of reasoning. I think that humanists, non-religious people, atheists are sometimes so scared of, and rightly so, of not wanting to indoctrinate their kids. But we wouldn't. If we don't want to indoctrinate them, we need to support their education. Now, respecting my boys' rights to make their own decisions doesn't mean not providing them with that information. My youngest, I should say, is 2, and my eldest is 5. So we're not really dealing with these issues a lot yet. But there are flashes. There are opportunities to answer questions or to bring things up. We can talk about examples of religion when they see them or question them. When they see that there's a Christmas tree up, when they see that there is a menorah up, they can ask questions about that and answering them. I have various children's books about the subject, or on we've got a sort of social issues bookshelf as well. But even some of those are a little bit too advanced. And whenever I do talk about or point out religious stuff, I'm really super conscious and careful not to essentialize. I've got a book on my shelf here somewhere called What We Believe, and it's a classic book about many of us may have had in our school library when we were younger, and it's different like religious people and what they do in their day. And I worry about things like that because it can be very essentialist. So I'm always trying not to essentialize. Whenever I point something out, I would say, I don't say there's a menorah there, that's what Jews have. Some Jewish people have menorah. Some people have this to celebrate this. If they were to ask a question about why our neighbor or why people wear hijabs, I wouldn't say Muslims wear this because. I would say some Muslim people wear this. Some people you kind of talk about how people make choices. And what I would say to humanist parents what I would recommend if humanist parents, if they're addressing religious beliefs, I would say they would try to say something like, this is what I believe. I think I have good reasons for what I believe. Other people may believe this. They may think they have good reason for this. I trust you to decide. And I love you. That's the kind of that's the approach. And if all religious parents took that same approach, I think we'd be in a lot more a lot more understanding world as well. And of course, many do.
That's one part of it. Are there other things that we pick up through pop culture and media that are not inherently humanist or secular or just things that we might think of as positive, but that children friggin' adore? So things like, I don't know if you have it in England, but we have this invasive Canadian TV show called Paw Patrol that, it's very hierarchical. It shows tremendous disdain for elected officials. It has hatred of cats. And I know in the UK you have Thomas the Tank Engine, which is incredibly anti-labor.
Yeah, so I am at the view that Thomas the Tank Engine is fascist propaganda, is anti-labor, anti-working class, ableist, all the rest of it. My kid loves Thomas the Tank Engine too much, so he's put my foot down on that. Unfortunately, we would always talk about kindness, etc. I think this is an area that, because we have many humanist parents are so scared of being accused of indoctrination that can sometimes lead to a worry, and progressive parents as well, of worry about setting boundaries. And this comes to in parenting theory. I know this is sort of a little bit of a outdated, slightly debunked theory of parenting, that you have authoritarian, authoritative, and permissive. And this would be the difference between permissive parenting and authoritative parenting. There was one TV show my kids we liked, Peppa Pig. It's just full of body shaming, really quite nasty things, and so we just sort of say, that's not something we watch in this house anymore, and we get a bit of pushback at that. And also it's about their age, because if they were teenagers, I wouldn't be controlling that I wouldn't be controlling their media to that extent. But what I would always hopefully we have a conversation about something that I see as problematic, and hopefully they can, as they get older, they can have that conversation is a two-way thing. I don't see the promotion or even the inculcation of worldviews as inherently problematic. My problem with sort of proselytization and evangelism is twofold. It's not about, I don't have a problem with people inculcating religious worldviews in their children. I have a slight problem with those worldviews having some factual, some logical holes in them. But what I'm concerned about how often that inculcation comes with aspects of emotional manipulation, fear, or stigmatization. And again, it doesn't necessarily it inherently has to, but I would say that I work to inculcate a worldview in my children. What I don't do is use. First of all, I feel that worldview is a defensive one, and it's a worldview that is not binding them and shutting down their future choices. And it's a worldview I'm kind of doing in a more conscious way, and I'm not using what I would consider emotionally manipulative circumstances. I saw one of these TikTok things shared recently from evangelical parenting influencers, and the dads every night, the little prayer they say to their kids, which is basically like, I want to love you forever, so you better stay Christian. Now, we can talk about the complicated question of whether or not I want my kids to be humanists and the extent to which that might be a legitimate or illegitimate desire. But they're never going to hear, by the way, if you don't keep your membership of Humanist UK paid up, then you're going to find somewhere else to live. They're not going to hear that. They're not going to hear that from me.
Have they ever come up with something that was like a surprising sort of humanist insight? Have you had those moments where you're like, you know what, this is working, and I know it's working because the little one said this or did this? Have you seen that? Because I on the other hand, like the negative side, we've seen what happens with too much garbage television. We know what happens, how kids sort of soak that up. But have you seen it on the other side? What's it like when it works the way you want it to?
Their ability to self-advocate which is something we're trying to develop with them, is really important. Now, recently, my eldest had a bit of a meltdown, and afterwards we were having a little cuddle, and I said, you lose your temper sometimes, don't you? And he said, yes, I do. You lose your temper too sometimes, Daddy. Now, he felt completely safe in saying that, and calling me out, yeah. And there are some, and I wouldn't necessarily say intrinsically religious parenting, but religious parenting tends to be focused more on hierarchical kind of outcomes in that structured outcomes in that sense. But if I was an authoritarian parent, then that would be challenging the hierarchy, and they'd be like, no, I'm the dad. This is the hierarchy. It goes dad, mum, kids. I can tell you off, but you can't tell me off. They ask questions kind of all the time. They sometimes ask, and their ability to form questions becomes more and more complicated. And I'll say there are times when them asking questions is actually kind of gets really on your nerves and is exhausting, and are kind of like, I wish I could just say to you, that's just the way it is, and don't ask me any questions. You can say, I'm too tired to talk about this right now, and that's okay. I think in a setting that comes back to the authoritative versus permissive parenting, we want to encourage their skepticism, encourage their critical thinking. The best way to do that is to encourage them to ask questions. You can still say to them, you're not wrong for asking questions. I'm not telling you off for asking questions, but it is 10 at night, and I don't care how many that station has.
One other thing that I found really interesting reading your blog is how you talk about retaining like these kind of rituals, but drawing upon like other kind of points in the calendar, like Women's History Month, for example, and like kind of these themed months and how you kind of decorate for that and so on. I don't know how to combine these questions, but I also wanted to ask about like, you have these kind of more kind of secular holidays or times, I suppose. But I wonder about like if you mark like Christmas and Easter and so on, and how do you approach those? And like also like about Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny and so on. Do you use or do you talk about those characters or how does
I
that
think
that fit
the
into your
Easter
humanist
Bunny is
parenting?
North American cultural journey that hasn't quite made it over this side. Father Christmas, Santa Claus, that is something that I think if you start looking out, trying to research humanist, non-religious parenting, that it's a real favourite topic to talk about. And there's the argument of, oh, you mustn't, because you must never lie to your children, or this, or you must because it gives them the chance to practice critical thinking. On that, kind of led by our kids, humanists have a complex relationship with ritual and religion, particularly in the religious context, because I think we tend to see that all the ways it can be twisted or coercive. But generally speaking, humanists, we're part of our general cultural background and part of our general kind of background baseline culture in the UK is to celebrate Christmas and to buy cheap Easter eggs. So that's what that's what we do, and we develop our own rituals around it. We don't go to church at Christmas. I'm trying to think. Outside of baby groups, I don't think the kids have been to church outside of baby groups. I need to wrap my brains about that. But we have our family traditions that we create, and that means stuff to us. And the humanist thing on that is that rituals are great if they're tools and they're something that supports us. They shouldn't be something kind of that oppresses us and binds us. Right. And actually, we realise that it's all made up. If we wanted to, we could celebrate Christmas on the 26th of March. It might be less fun if there's less people around us who are also excited about it. But I think there's a lot of value in traditions. Rituals should be our tools, not our masters. And taking ownership of rituals and creating our own, I think, can give us that understanding that they are that not just that intellectual understanding, but that kind of muscle memory, real tactile understanding that rituals are all made up, and if they're good, we can do them. If they're bad, if you've got some ritual around going out and giving out food on special holidays, that's nice. Let's continue that. If you've got a ritual that's around, shunning certain people or stoning certain people, we can avoid that. I say my wife's brilliant at doing kind of seasonal arts and crafts activities during the year. I'll go to the cupboard to get some paints out, and it's near Easter, and there's like 100 Easter stickers for them to be doing that activity with. And same with Christmas and Halloween. And I've started my own small tradition of kind of creating different displays in the living room for different months as a way of putting my humanism into action, showing solidarity, celebrating life, seeing. And this is kind of a new tradition that we're just starting, and we're just kind of gauging the boys' interest in. Is it something again to want to do, looking going forward? Is something they'll be very excited about, or is it kind of just something that might peter out? We don't know yet. So we have our LGBT Progress Pride flags up for History Month and for Pride Month. We have kind of some autism stuff up for Autism Pride. We bought green ribbons for Mental Health Day. I created a little World Humanist Day display, and it was fun. And I printed out some different stencils for the boys to try to fill in with paints, and they didn't go for that activity, so we haven't done that.
Right.
I go to my sort of social issues bookshelf and see if there's a good book that lines up with it. And I remember going out for a walk, and there's a couple of people around here that have flagpoles, and they have different flags up for different stuff. And my kid, my eldest Teddy, asked, "Oh, what's that? Why they have that? Why that flag up?" And I say it's that, and I create those links. And when Christmas comes around, I'll be able to create the links between, we're putting up a Christmas tree, but it's Christmas time. We're putting up this because it's this time, and we also do this, and that's part of just how we kind of celebrate stuff in this house.
Yeah, it sounds like it's almost contradictory, like neo-traditionalism. It's only new traditions in your house, or are there things that have been transmitted from previous generations?
I would say in a kind of indirect way. I know that some of kind of my Jewish cultural heritage influences in a kind of diffuse way, but a way I nevertheless can see my ideas about having something like decorations and the value of symbols. We have various kind of collections. I can see those links, but they tend to be rather diffuse. I don't think it's necessarily new traditions having to be new, because it'd be nice actually if these traditions did bed down quite a lot. I think there's a tradition that I've inherited that my mum also was really good at finding kind of seasonal activities for us to do, often on a very tight budget. But when I think about the complex relationship that humanists tend to have with ritual and tradition, it's multifaceted. I don't know if you had similar thing in Canada, but during COVID over here, we had this thing where at 10 o'clock at night on one day of the week, everyone would lean out their windows and bang on pots and pans to celebrate and to cheer for our National Health Service workers and our frontline workers. And that started, and that someone came to said, it's a nice idea to do this. It kind of went viral on social media. I think some other countries did similar stuff. And it was really great and lovely when that first started. And we were all really isolated. Seeing our neighbours leaning out the windows, waving and banging pots and pans was exciting and energizing. And then a few weeks went by this going on, and then it started to be certain people on the village Facebook page about, I noticed that there was not very many people out there, or and then. Yeah. And then the ritual kind of became performative and co-opted, and then the subject of political debate of whether this is this ritual placating people and and trying to countering arguments for more systemic changes necessary. So that was a ritual that also ran its course. I think the person behind the original poster went viral, said that they felt that it had run its course, and it was no longer having the power to bring people together that it once had. So rituals can be valuable and meaningful if they're something you do twice. A tradition is something you do twice, and it can be meaningful, but still come to the end once your kids get bored of it or decide that it's a bit weird and they don't want to do it anymore. You don't know. Yeah.
Now, are there any that you feel have kind of run their course? Big picture, not just in your immediate family, but big ones that are part of either the larger UK culture or national culture, a broader culture that you think, we're just not going to do that. It doesn't match our need. It doesn't show our ideals. We don't draw any meaning from this. Is there anything that you felt should go away and you've rejected?
Yeah, let's not open the whole monarchy box. That might take a long way.
I think that answers the question. Actually,
I find myself, it's so often in children's books. You have royals and kings and queens and princesses, and it's kind of for the children's books. It's often a stand-in to tell the young reader who doesn't understand these very complicated things, that they're rich and powerful and important. And sometimes I think about, and I'm reading the book on the fly of editing those slightly.
Yeah, that's one that I've also noticed. Like it's kind of it's insidious in like how generic it is. Like the way Disney movies use it, and even Mario Brothers, the recent movie, it's all about a princess and a kingdom, and it's like, do we really need this?
When I was first kind of thinking about having kids around the time that some royal baby was being born, and I remember walking past, looking in little baby clothes shops, and had these baby clothes that said future wife of Prince George on them.
Oh God.
And so maybe that was my radicalization moment.
Yes.
In the UK, we tend to think of ourselves as a very secular society, and in many ways that is true. But that is also because the ways in which religious privilege manifests in the UK is very often institutionalized in a way that when we compare, so we can, and this will come as no surprise to you as Canada. There's often this spectre of America and Americanism, and there's often a comparison to Americanism. So you talk about the problems.
That's me, by the way, Alastair. I'm the spectre of America in this conversation.
No, that's the nickname, is it? But there's very often you talk about the problems of religious privilege in this country, and people, but we're not like America, where it's like, well, yes, but that's visible in America, whereas it's kind of institutionalized here. We don't. It's getting a little bit far from the point, but I'll bring it back to kind of schools and stuff in a minute. But we in this country look at the American election and kind of the hundreds of millions spent on election, and we see that level of political spending as corrupt, and we're very proud that our elections are actually run on, reasonably modest budgets. But then, you can basically just buy a seat in our legislature. In that party donors are pretty much top of the list when it comes to nominating peers, but that's institutionalized, so we don't see it as corrupt. We look at we look at America and say that they have the Pledge of Allegiance over there, and we feel very smug, and us very very smug, enlightened, liberal Europeans, and say, oh, in America they make them recite a pledge, the flag, every day in school. And in our country, we have compulsory worship in many. Legally we should have compulsory worship in all schools, but luckily a lot of schools just ignore that law. But because that's kind of so institutionalized and so normalized, we don't see that in the same way.
That's weird. Oh, so when it does come up, though, because at some point it must. Is it, do you take the little ones aside and say, like, look, here's the thing you need to know about that? Or is it just more conversational?
You need to decide your battles. And when I was, it's not, I don't kind of work in secular education advocacy anymore. But when I did, very often parents would get in touch about something going on in that school that they felt was wrong. And they didn't actually want to challenge it. They just kind of wanted to say to someone, I just feel this is a bit wrong. And I'd advise hundreds of parents on how to deal with issues at schools, and just ask for a meeting with head teacher, just calmly explain and set out what your problems are and what you'd like them to do. And then my kid is practicing for the school concert, and they've got 8 songs they need to learn, and they're all really religious. And me, with my kind of almost a decade experience as a secular education activist, looked at that and went, you know what? It's only one concert. Let's I'd rather kind of maybe we'll say something to school afterwards about it, but yeah, on balance. And everyone needs to deal. You often would find that people would talk about faith schools in this country. There's no problem at all, and then they find out that they're forced into one, or on the other hand, that they very often people are really surprised that faith schools can legally discriminate, which for me, someone kind of deeply involved in that policy area for years, and the wider kind of humanist secularist conversation about policy in the UK, it was like, how could you not know that? But yeah, people are often really surprised. It's often, I really found that parents...
Alastair, what is just for the audience clarification, what is a faith school? Is it the same as a private religious institution? Is it a private school?
In England and Wales, we have different education systems across the UK, but England and Wales, around a third of our schools are faith schools, in that they have a formal religious designation or ethos, and all of them can practice various forms of discrimination. Some of them really quite limited religious discrimination, so some of them can only require the head teacher and a certain number of teachers are a certain faith, right the way up to school. They can select all their pupils based on religion, and theoretically all their teachers based on religion. Of course, even there, they don't actually always select all their teachers based on religion, because there just wouldn't be enough religious teachers. And a law in this country requires that all schools have a daily act of Christian collective worship. A lot of schools, a lot of schools just kind of ignore that, and it often depends on kind of the culture. It depends on the head teacher's personal views. It obviously, if it is a faith school, they tend to follow the law on that quite strictly. Otherwise, it depends really on the head teacher's kind of personal approach often, and their sense of their sense of the culture of the school, and whether or not they think they could get away with that, or parents would welcome it or oppose it. So I think sometimes we can kind of get into the question about what issues religious humanist parents deal with, or non-religious parents deal with. We often kind of have this deficit first approach of talking about defending being a humanist by pointing out all the problems that religion does, and actually and kind of arguing people. No, I know you think the UK is very secular, but actually there's all these things where the UK isn't very secular. Whereas, and that's important and valid and great work that people do on those campaigns. But there's also value in talking about, we're lucky that our school in the village is very secular. We live in a part of the country and a sort of level of urbanization where you would actually typically expect the school to be a faith school, but luckily enough, it's not. And so quite lucky in that sense. And I try to talk about I'm not a humanist parent because I'm really super worried about the bad stuff about religion. It's because I think that humanism is a worldview that can inform my approach to parenting in a positive way.
Wow, that's a great answer. That makes a lot of sense. And that also ties into larger concepts of humanism, or perhaps the larger humanist world. What are humanist communities like, and what are the obstacles to building them?
Oh, and that's kind of getting in some ways that's getting away from just about my kind of personal interest in humanist parenting towards my professional interest in humanist community organising. So as I say, I work for Humanist UK on community organising, but I'm talking to you now in a really personal capacity. On the other hand, I think there's a lot of similarity, because in some ways parenting is about developing part of parenting is developing a community that supports your children. You tend to make friends with other parents that and often your kids play together. The friends that you have, if you've got a friendship circle, some of whom have kids, some who don't, there are times where you kind of end up kind of gravitating more together, the parents with kids. You go to activities where you meet other parents, and it's all actually, there's a lot of community building around that. Our kids have guide parents, they have biological aunts and uncles, and a reasonably extensive circle of other people who are aunts, who are who they know as their aunts and uncles. My work at Humanist UK, Humanist UK are developing their own volunteer-led local groups around the country. Humanist UK have long had a network of partner groups, but are volunteer-run groups they're places like Sheffield, Exeter, Leicester, and those aren't separate organisations. They are Humanist UK in a city, working with our supporters and volunteers to create a community there. And my role is really kind of the boring behind-the-scenes stuff that is not exciting, but is really important to building successful communities, systems and processes to help volunteers, research on best practices and ideas around community building, community organising. And there's a lot of episodes of the podcast that touch on that. I've probably listened to those to get kind of ideas about best practices to help create resources to support that. Did you ask a question about the challenges of humanist community organising?
It was probably in there, but I think the first part answered it more, because there's that really fascinating thing where, like the way you're trying to live leads to the creation of a community of like-minded people. And the way you first tackled it, it really dovetailed together, that idea of like, you're trying to do it in a humanist way and you run into other humanists who face the same problems and are trying to do the same thing. I mean, I see that as such an important piece, and it seems like, does the Humanist UK allow for does it facilitate people meeting like that?
There are local humanist organisations around the country. It's certainly something that Humanist UK are developing, in addition to kind of pre-existing local humanist communities developing their own local, what we used to call branches, what we call local groups. And yeah, people in those local groups do meet. And I think actually a slight problem about humanist community organising is often people come to these groups looking for friendships, and then they make friends. And sometimes when you make friends, you no longer need that kind of support structure. There's often people often come for these groups maybe on a particular part of their journey. So it can be a journey. People might really need humanist community when they're coming out of religion, because they don't know what does it mean to have a community outside of this religious context they've had. And coming to a humanist community, they then develop that understanding that you can have community separate to religion, but the community separate to religion they find might be, park run, knitting group, book club, Sunday league, etc. When you don't have access to kind of well-established networks that religious communities provide, you do have to make your own. And I think that a local humanist group will not ever provide for you a comprehensive community, and I don't think it would ever really seek to. In some ways, I think humanists would be kind of quite worried and squeamish about if we were trying to completely replace and create entire social network for people. And I think if we became too successful at that, we'd actually be worried about our success, and we'd be full of we'd be full of self-doubt. And actually, I think it's about providing a little something. Sometimes the affirmation of going to a humanist community, kind of and meeting up with like-minded people once or twice a month, kind of can buoy you up and make you kind of feel connected to other people, and then you go off and do other community stuff in the meantime.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, that like people need community for different reasons at different points of their lives, I think. And sometimes, they may drift in and out of the community, and they may, like you said, like if you leave a religion, you might be searching for a kind of a like-minded community, but once you go there and you meet other people, then you may not actually need to attend anymore because you've made friends separately from that. Yeah, it's a good point. And I think too, like the point, I think it relates to the parenting question too, this sort of like hesitation for humanists to be indoctrinating people and like kind of authoritarian and like kind of controlling people. And I think that this kind of runs up against the idea of like creating kind of these like institutions and so on, like that there's a a reluctance about being too kind of restrictive, I guess, or whatever, to kind of
Yeah.
keep a community together. Yeah.
I was at work yesterday. We were having a kind of a staff meeting, and a conversation about this actually really strikes a lot of nerves. Strikes nerves in a happy, lovely connection, aha, humanism way. And there's a saying, and I believe it's from a organizer of a left-wing group called Momentum in the UK. I might be wrong on that. That ideology, I can't actually remember the exact saying, but ideology begets strategy. And there are certain community building strategies that are simply less open to humanists because of our ideology. We can't sell tickets into heaven if you turn up often enough. We can't say, come along to our meetings and actually helps you get into your local school, because that's just not how it works. And we often, when it comes to this kind of ideology influencing strategy, we often also overlook the role of capital. Oil barons and crypto billionaires and whatever other Mr. Burns characters you want to see out in the world. Basically, billionaires don't leave billions to bankroll local or endow local humanist organizations. If a billionaire said, I'm giving all my money away to promote humanism, I think humanists would actually be a bit squeamish about that. I'm not sure that's right. We'll be something else to criticize. But people do endow religious organizations in that way.
Right. Yeah.
Community organizing is a lot easier when you own your own buildings, when you can fund the whole development pipeline, when the idea that your form of community building is intrinsically important is continually culturally and legally reinforced. And humanist communities have not built up the decades or centuries of institutional experience, connection and capital necessary. We're not the Church of England. We don't have a £10 billion investment property portfolio. We can't spend £250 million on church planting while receiving £750 million over the same period in state grants and tax rebates. If you look at it pound for pound, British humanist community building leaves the state church in the dust. How that we don't look at it pound for pound in that sense.
Well, with that in mind, let's turn to what true atheists, or in this case, what true humanists can believe. Nathan, can you walk us through how to play the lightning round game of can a true humanist?
Yeah, so in this round, we ask somewhat tongue-in-cheek questions, but also serious, I suppose, certain questions about what a true atheist, or in this case, humanist, can or cannot do. So you can give a yes or no answer and then a short explanation. It's been so long since we did this that I kind of forget what the usual spiel is, but anyway, I think that's everything. So the usual baseline question: can a true humanist believe in God?
Under the definition of humanism understood and accepted by humanists as a movement, as institutions, no. However, under alternative definitions, under non-mainstream definitions, yes.
Wow. There are non-mainstream humanists? Are there like sects inside of humanism?
Well, I mean, there are certain forms of Christianity that say, "Oh, we're the real humanists." But the humanist movement's collective consensus view of what humanism means, I would say, if you have a definition of humanism which involves a belief in God, I'm not saying that, but that definition is wrong. But it is at odds with the humanist consensus.
What the sort of accepted definition of one is. Well, in that case, can a true humanist
which again descriptive. It's something that's emerged on the humanist movement. It's not something that we have sort of came down on stone tablets.
Yeah, it's not. Nobody loses their card over saying God bless you, something like that. Well, then, can a true humanist take their children to church even if they don't personally believe in God?
Yes. I wouldn't personally. I'm not in a mixed belief marriage. Many people are in mixed belief marriages and people also kind of are searching for something, and although they are human, though they're human, they might find something useful and meaningful, and perhaps that's a sign that we need to have more family-friendly, inclusive humanist communities to provide for those needs as well.
Can a true humanist consult a psychic?
I think we're in the yes, but you probably shouldn't section of the quiz. So maybe just yes, but you probably shouldn't. A key concept within humanism is that the solution to our problems are, if we can have solutions to them, will come from the natural world and human beings' agency. We will address climate change through actions that we take as a species, or we won't. And depending on which day, I'll leave it up to you whether we will or we won't. But if we do, it will be through human action. Psychics in the UK, I think, have to say that they're for entertainment purposes only, and if people want to be entertained, then of course they can.
Ooh, that's interesting. Okay, can a true humanist think humans are a superior species?
Yes, and some people who find us as a sentientists, as you would know from your podcast, feel that's a problem with humanism. I'm a humanist and a humanist in the sense that I do think that humans are more important. If I was in a burning building and I could save one human or 100 bunnies, then I think I'd save the human. But I'm a humanist. Part of being a humanist is I'm part of nature. I think humans are the most important part of nature to other humans, but we are part of nature, and so yes, other living things, of course, do have important value. Would I save, in a burning building and it was every bunny in the world, every bunny, cat, and dog in the world, or one human? Maybe in that case, I'd save all the cute animals. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that those sort of hypotheticals are so like, well, I mean, it's not possible, obviously, or it's like, it's not going to happen with that anyway. On another note, can a true humanist enjoy ghost stories? And maybe more generally, like in your own parenting, like do you read stories that have kind of like supernatural elements in them, and how do you go about that?
Yes, and I think sometimes having a rational approach to life can diminish your ability to suspend your disbelief. Perhaps, maybe thinking about things too rationally can spoil a good ghost story. I have to say that, generally speaking, I try to avoid supernatural elements within storytelling. I love watching Bluey with my kids. I don't know if you're familiar with the cartoon show Bluey. Hopefully not in the audience will be. It's about a cartoon dog. There's a few episodes that have kind of magic in it, and I kind of tend to skip that. I tend to avoid stories that have that. But there's a series that my eldest kid loves of Thomas Hankin videos that have a ghost train, and he loves ghost trains. So you can't. I wouldn't completely. I wouldn't ever say you're not allowed those stories. I think there's some value in, while children are developing their understanding of what the natural world is, of not overly complicating that with ghost stories and stuff. But you know what? I don't think they're going to believe in ghosts if they hear one ghost story now and again.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of values, though, can a true humanist look to religion to find some good values?
Every book. Well, I know we're now dealing with ChatGPT, but before ChatGPT, I could confidently say that every book that had been written by a person. The Bible was written by people, and every religious text, excluding any that have been written in the last 2 years by generative AI, were written by people. And if they've got good ideas, we can take those things, because there have always been people the people we now have the label humanist to describe have kind of always been there. And we have this, well, very often we have a view of people in the past weren't as smart as us, or everyone in the past was superstitious. Everyone in the past thought the world was flat. There have always been people who thought the world was flat, and there have always been people who understood it, who've been able to go up to the top of the hill and look and see that it isn't.
Well, you'll be happy to know, Alastair, that ChatGPT just plagiarizes what humans write. So it's still human ideas.
Right. Yes. Okay. And the last question, can a true humanist hope that their kids become humanists also?
Yes. If you, I might have to go a little bit more than a short explanation on that. If you read religious parenting books, there is an overwhelming, not just a parenting book written by someone who happens to be religious, but if you look at religious specific parenting advice, there's a kind of an overwhelming, often preoccupation with the idea of the importance of your children believing as you believe. And some humanists really super reject that. I don't think that having some desire for my children to be humanists is the same as religious indoctrination. However, I would say that for me, being a humanist parent is about how I act. I want to be a humanist parent for them, in that I want to parent in a way that is reasonable, ethical, empathetic, etc. And I very much hope that my children grow up understanding what humanism is and having a model of what humanism is, and understanding what humanist communities are and their potential, because to make their own choices, I want them to see that as a viable path and have that understanding. But equally, they have in this extended family, biological and found family of aunts and uncles, they have religious people. They will interact with religious people at all times. There's certain forms of religion I would very much want them to not adopt, and there's certain forms of humanism that I would quite like them to adopt. But my success or failure is how I treat them, not whether or not they choose a label that makes me happy and makes me feel that, oh, they've chosen the same label as me, or they've chosen the same beliefs as me, and that making kind of reflecting on my own ego is as important. I don't want them to join a religious death cult.
Yeah.
I don't want them to join a religious, anti-LGBT organization. I don't think that they will. I don't want them to become flat earthers. There's lots of things, like I said, I don't want them to be. But if they choose to adopt a religious label and a religious worldview that is kind of humanist friendly and generally okay, not going to feel too bad about that.
Mm-hmm. Will you reject them if they become hardcore Christians? Or
absolutely no. What I would talk, I would always talk to them about their belief. I would never not love my kids because of just intrinsic things about who they were. Like the idea of throwing my kids out the house because if one of them turned out to be LGBTQ or something, it is just, I mean, if one of my kids, I can imagine kind of one of my kids developing beliefs and values that are so extremely at odds with mine that maintaining a relationship would be difficult.
Right. They become a monarchist.
I think we'd managed to survive. We managed to survive. It's possible that they could develop beliefs that are so at odds with me morally that it would make a relationship very difficult. But those would have to be really, really extreme. And although I would always want to have conversations with them, I would never want them to be scared in any way, and scared of being chucked out the house, scared of I would not even want them to be scared of being made fun out of by me. And I've seen also some non-religious parents panic, when their kid starts praying because that's what their friends do, or because they saw it on TV and they thought it'd be, I wouldn't panic too much about that. I'd hope we'd have a really engaged aspect. And when I talk about what I believe and and I'll always talk about what I believe and why I think what I believe is reasonable. But if they believe differently, we'd have to. I can't imagine them, based on kind of the family and the community they have, I can't imagine them adopting homophobic religious beliefs. I think if they did, that would be something that would make maintaining a relationship very difficult. But them growing antennas or third limbs and tentacles seems to me to be a similar level of risk. Yeah, if they adopted a religious label, a religious identity, a religious worldview, that would be kind of interesting. Another factor I should say is religious differences between parents and children. We talk a lot about children kind of leaving religion and we understand that creates a gulf. There can be a big religious difference between parents and children when for one of them their non-religion is an important active part of their identity, and for the other, so if my kids were just didn't care about religion, they were just, I'm just non-religious, I don't really, that would be a religious difference in the same way that if they were kind of liberal Christian, that would also be a religious difference that we would find a way to address and to live with and to love around and through and over.
No, that was absolutely fascinating.
I wasn't very lightning in the lightning round, was I?
No, it was.
I didn't heal down.
It was really worth it to elaborate on some of those, especially the last one.
Definitely.
Really interesting stuff. And I think like humanists and atheists maybe don't think enough about these questions or talk enough about them. I'm not sure, but it's been really,
I think it's
really great. Yeah,
it can be something we think about, we don't talk about, because there are still people who sort of think that atheism should be, what we should talk about is just why the ontological argument is dumb.
Exactly. Yes, that's right.
Just why Kalam cosmological argument is
right.
Circular, just a circle jerk. That's all.
Yes.
And that's the only thing we should ever talk about as humanists or atheists. But I don't think so.
Yeah.
And it sounds like it's also kind of like they're so interrelated. It's just when you open your mind to it, you find that so much of what either you get from atheism or what leads you to atheism is also deeply embedded in the system of thought and the worldview that is humanism. And it's how do you enact it, which is a kind of missing step from atheism, is how you get from standing in opposition to religion to creating the world in the image that you build from atheism, if that makes sense.
I found when you did this, I think you did a series, we did them similar close. You had someone from Sweden and Norway on the podcast, didn't you? And Sweden and Norway are both incredibly secular, much more so than the UK actually, secular humanist societies. But in one country, all the humanists went and joined the Norwegian Humanist Association, and in the other country, all the humanists went and joined the Social Democratic Party. And it's kind of, there's a similar aspect. Like some people's, very people's humanism is directed into humanism in a strange way. Lots of great people who be great humanist community organisers are too busy organising other community stuff or running for local councils to sort out the bins and stuff. And it's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that we try to keep an eye on and look for all the different dynamics. Because even this, like the idea of humanist parenting, it's how does this look in this setting? How does it look in that setting? How you're discussing it now, like the community setting versus structures of power versus institutions. And it never goes away. And it's something that we as atheists and humanists and secularists always have to consider. And Alastair, you've given us a whole different realm to consider and think about, and given us a lot of the tools to point us towards the right direction. Um, Alistair, if people want to learn more, where should they go? What should they check out?
You can find me on my vlog, which is humanistdad.uk. I want to check it out. I want to give the wrong URL for my organization on a podcast when launching like a pretty major campaign. But it's humanistdad.uk.
Alistair, thank you so much for coming on today. This was fantastic.
Oh no, thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Okay, that was Alastair Lichten. It was really good talking with him. What did
Yeah.
you think about that? Anything jump out to you?
Well, yeah, I mean, one, it's so incredibly thoughtful. Like, and if you read through his blog post, it's, it takes the intentionality and how much he's focused on his family. It really shines through, right? It's someone who's putting a lot of work into it, mental and emotional and physical. And he's in, it's a challenge for everyone, and he's faced additional challenges. And this is a case where he's really highlighted that sort of distinction between the negative philosophy of atheism and the positive philosophy of humanism. And that's something I think as we've worked through this, what comes beyond atheism, it's one of the things that one of those threads that we found is it always leads to something. It leads away from something and leads to something else. And that humanism makes a lot of sense there.
Yeah, I think one of the really interesting things is that as an adult, if you're choosing your own, you're kind of forced to reconsider your values. You have the opportunity to kind of investigate things and think about it. Whereas if you're raising a child, the parents are the primary ones who are like instilling values in them. So that kind of really forces you to think about your values. You can't just kind of, you know, you have to be pretty clear like what sort of values you want to give them. And I think that's an interesting point. And again, like yeah, like I mean, atheism itself doesn't give you a guide to how to raise a child or anything, whereas humanism may do that.
Yeah, and I what related to that is like what those values are and how it's different from religion, because I don't know exactly what religion teaches how to raise a child, religiously, but it comes with certain things you have to do, right? There are things that need to be done, and you have to match what everybody else does. And Alistair, his point is like it's not about that outcome. It's not about creating this exact copy going forward. It's about creating someone who holds those values and has these capabilities and has the sort of right outlook and has, yeah, values in that way, but not this prescriptive directive where you need to be this and you need to do it like this and you have to follow this and this is how it works. And we all need to agree to these points, these outcomes and goals, whatever it is. Yeah. Whereas it seems much more like it's an ethical set of how you live your life, what you need to be compatible with the larger world and our place in it.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think what another interesting thing to me was kind of how, as a parent, like you interact with the wider culture of like thing like we talked about, like Santa Claus, or more broadly, like reading stories or watching TV shows that have magic or ghosts or whatever. And it does pose a challenge again because like, again, like the parents are the one who primarily who kind of are that kind of buffer or whatever between this various kind of media and so on, or whatever, or barrier, whatever you want to say, or filter. So I think it's another question, like, I mean, how to go about those ones. I think it's a really interesting one. Like, for me, like I don't hold any grudges against my parents for doing Santa Claus and stuff. I found that really fun. Do you like hold that away from your kids, like kind of on principle because you don't want to deceive them or to kind of show them that the world is not naturalistic or whatever? Yeah, it's an interesting.
Yeah, but I mean, the flip side of it is like, religious families who don't celebrate Halloween because it's the devil's night,
Yeah.
or, you know,
Yes.
Jehovah's
Yes.
Witnesses who don't celebrate birthdays and things like that. There's all of these come loaded with that. And his approach hasn't been one of denial and exclusion. It's been one of, finding joy, finding interest in developing the positive from it while interrogating what it promotes and finding a way to counteract it, which is a lot different from the most rigorous of Christians who we know who complain about the secular world and Hollywood and Disney and blah blah blah, and likewise a lot of the right wing complaining.
Yeah, it was definitely a really rich discussion, and there's more on his blog, I guess we can say.
Yeah, there's a lot more on the blog, and
Yeah.
the other thing about it is you really get the sense that how much of it is an experiment and an adventure, and that's something that he's finding out on, and kind of developing as he goes, which is, and part of this is, it's a thing that we've kind of selected into as atheists. People who are not members of a church. We don't have that to fall back onto. And he talks about the challenges of when you do have to use those resources that are connected to religious groups. And the other thing, it's part of a very modern tradition where modern condition, not tradition, modern condition where we are not all born in one place, live our life in one place, and die in one place. We're not tied to these set communities anymore, and we have to go out, and we've all had to move around and ended up in different places. And how do we reconstruct the things that we need? How do we find the meaning in a community that we have to build for ourselves from pieces that are very, very different, come from different backgrounds, different beliefs, different practices, and different traditions? How do we find a place that's welcoming to that? And he both as a parent and as a humanist, we see that, that community building has been a big part of his life. So salutes, big ups for Alastair for that, because that's it's a vital work that not enough people are doing and not enough people know how to do. It's courageous of him to put it online for the world to see. And
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So we'll link his blog below. Check it out. Yeah.
definitely. And Nathan, what have we been up to? What have you been up to? If you you've been
it's
posting on the daily,
no, it's been the summer has flown by. Yeah. How about
right?
you?
It flies by when you're on the beach all the time. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
exactly.
Lying there fighting with seagulls,
Yeah, that's right.
thinking about constantly looking at clouds, going, "Yeah, there's no God." That's what atheists do.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But other than that, yeah, complete
Mhm.
just living under a rock. Happily though, that's the important thing, Nathan.
Yeah, yeah.
So if people want to reach out to you, how they contact you on the Twitter? Do you still have that? Does that still
Uh,
exist?
it's X now. I'm not really there anymore. I'm on Blue Sky if you want to
Blue
reach me
Sky.
there. For my,
Link
yeah.
below.
Yes. Yeah.
Comments, questions, complaints. That name aimed at, is it Nathan J. Alexander?
I don't remember what it is on Blue Sky, but yeah, I'll post it.
Cool.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, good promo. Yeah.
What I like is how we're so integrated and connected now. Anybody can
Yeah.
reach out, talk to
Yeah.
anybody.
Most people just Google now and stuff like that. But yeah, or search.
Exactly. It was a great chat with Alastair. He's doing great work. All the links are below if you want to check out his blog, check out the work he does with Humanist UK. Also, big thanks to the audience. You guys are terrific. We love hearing from you, whether it's Twitter, Blue Sky, or a carrier pigeon, whatever it may be. Big thanks to Atheist United out of California and Red Japan, as always, playing that theme music. God, it's so
Yeah.
good. How did it stay so good? It's ageless.
It
It's
is.
wonderful. All right. Until next time. Bye-bye.